Welcome to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism in Modern Life, hosted by Adam Piercy and Mick Mulroy. Welcome back to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism. My name is Adam Piercy, and I'm here with my co-host Mick Mulroy. Today, we're going to jump definitely right into it because this is a topic that we're both excited to talk about, which is Stoicism as a street philosophy. I think it's something that's unique to this philosophy in many ways. It's something that's unique to why we started this podcast and really what we're trying to do as opposed to what we're trying to not do. So I know Mick has opening thoughts on this one, and I'd love to hear an opening salvo from Mick on this one. So Mick, why don't you kick us off today?
Absolutely, Adam. So, you said it. It's why we started the podcast, because this philosophy, I think, more so than many others, really is about practical application. It's about how to deal with things that come up in life in a manner that's more productive for you and for those you interact with in society, right? And I will go through the why we think that's the case. But I think it's, for those that are familiar with Stoicism, I also think it's like, yeah, no kidding, right? So as some that might be listening, I grew up with a lot of academics. My dad was a scientist and a professor. Certainly love the academic aspect. I'd probably like to end, my career in some form or fashion in academia. But what I don't think is helpful is for a philosophy just to be tied up in, the ivory tower, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because it does the least amount for the least amount of people that way. Again, nothing against academics. I'm from them. But Stoicism started, as we all know, based primarily on the fact that a businessman had gone through such a tumultuous event that he was basically no longer a businessman because all of his stuff sunk to the bottom of the ocean right off the coast of Piraeus.
Yeah.
Right? And he came to shore, found Socrates, our godfather, who exemplified, I think, in many ways, the practical application of his philosophy, his way of thinking.
Yeah.
And then basically became a cynic. And a cynic at the time was demonstrably on the streets, right? I mean, that's where they literally lived, on the streets. So it wasn't just something that his version, which was to meet on the streets, right, at the Stoa, at the Porch, vice the Plato's Academy, the Academy, vice the Lyceum, Aristotle, which was a place for academia, maybe the beginning of academia. Stoicism started by meeting people in the place where they lived, in the agora, on the porch. Yeah. And as it was told to me, it was often then followed by walking around Athens and up in the mountains around Athens, which I used to do all the time when I lived there. It's great trail running races around there. But there's a lot of key landmarks that, because Greece is so full of just major historic events, would seem like a major historic landmark that people just don't even pay attention to about. But I used to think when I'd be running and I'd see, like there was one place where the person who saw the battle down in Marathonos would light a torch to say if they weren't successful, they were coming toward Athens, right? Which, as you all know, is around 26 miles away. But I would see that and say, well, I wonder if, and it was a path, and it probably was a path at the time, right, to get up to the watch post. I think maybe they walked up here, right? Why not? It's a path, goes to the top of the mountain. It's within distance of Athens. So I bring that up because I've always viewed it as a philosophy for people who are very much engaged in the world, businessmen, obviously, businessmen that lose everything, have an issue that they have to deal with. Soldiers, right? We all know, of course, Marcus Aurelius, but you could go down to every one of his legionnaires, everything they had to deal with whether they were going to be courageous enough in battle to meet the mark of a legionnaire. Almost all of them are Stoics, right?
Yeah.
And that of course is carried throughout history with the connection between the military and Stoicism. But I also think scientists, especially practical ones, engineers like yourself, they very much have to make things happen. It's not just theoretical, right? It's taking, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm kidding, but the way I always viewed engineers is they take a lot of theory and make it into practical application, right?
Yeah.
That I imagine is very difficult and very challenging. And you find out, and you either succeed or you don't. And you could go down the list, obviously. And then athletes is, but you talk about some immediate feedback. If you're running a race, you either win or you don't. It's kind of hard to talk your way into a win, right?
Yeah.
So it's very, and I've always thought that is really the essence of the philosophy. It's, deal with what you can, accept what you can't, it's not up to you, and then live virtuously. Right.
Yeah.
And you can pontificate about the meaning of life. Absolutely. Like a lot of other philosophies do. And so does Stoicism. But it's also very much how to live your life on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's what we're trying. Not that me and you figured it out. We're just two dudes talking about it. But that's, I think, what Stoicism is ultimately about. It's not to be locked up in an ivory tower. It's not to just talk about the same individuals, as important as they are. It isn't just to talk about, Zeno, Epictetus, Seneca, Aurelius, as if it's not a living, breathing philosophy. Our last episode was about the next phase of Stoicism. That's what I think it is about. It is something for people in everyday life, and it's something for them to essentially own personally and drive it forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when you look at it in a historical context, right? Like you have in like when during Roman times, the reason why Stoicism rose in Roman times was because Stoics had been prominent philosophers for emperors and leaders and high businessmen and stuff like that for many years. But what also happened was there was this like cultural envoy from Greece that went to Rome. And one of the big things that they did with that envoy was that Greek philosophers, including Stoic philosophers, were lecturing to the people of Rome in the street in like it was near the Forum. I know that. I don't know exactly where. Even though I was at the Forum recently, I don't know exactly where it was, but there was definitely this thing about talking to the people of Rome and discussing the philosophy in that context, right? And Stoicism, I don't know that it's unique in that, but I know that it's definitely a key tenet for us is that we want to talk about it. I mean, the name Stoic comes from a stoa, which is a covered porch, which in the agora, the marketplace in Athens, was where they met. And frankly, I think anybody could show up, right? And that's the thing is you're talking about it, from a perspective of people that aren't professional philosophers. They're not selling their sophistry or philosophical wares, as it were, to emperors and kings and whichever. They're meeting to discuss how to live and then living it. And that's something that is at least somewhat unique to the practice, I think, in its own way. I always struggle with the more, I don't want to say academic, but the ones where they're very austere and they, there are, as far as I can tell, there aren't any Stoic monks. Like, we're not, Stoics are married, they have kids, they have lives, they usually have a career that's running parallel to their practice. And that's what the street life is like, right? Like you try to be a good person, but you also have to hawk fish heads or shovel coal or work in a mine or be an engineering person or make a living, be a soldier like yourself as you were before. Right. So it's one of those things, I think. So, but, I think as well, though, what I see as well is that when you look at the history of Stoicism, and there's a great bit about this in some of the books by Donald Robertson and Ryan Holiday, is that essentially the writings kind of point to the fact that like most prominent philosophies from the Grecian period talk about three things. There's There's logos, ethos, and then there's another one that I can't remember right now because I'm talking about it and I lost my train of thought. But the Stoics were kind of saying in their own writings and whatnot, like the one that really only matters is ethics, how you
Mhm.
live your day, how you go about day to day, right? So it's not that they didn't have physics. That's the one.
Yeah,
Logos, physics, and
yeah,
ethics, right? And it's not like
absolutely.
they said that logos and physics was not important, but the emphasis is clearly on the ethics side of it, i.e., what is your outward living going to be like, right? And I think the discussion of things that are metaphysical, right, the physics and logos that you see in all philosophies usually is useful, but at the same time, I think it's a practical application of philosophy that is ethics, and that's where the Stoics definitely, put most of their focus.
And if you get that right, that's the most important, right? Because how you conduct yourself
Yeah,
reflects on you, your family, your friends, your society.
yeah,
So those that, if we all agree to, and Stoics are pretty specific about, the virtues, right? Wisdom, justice.
yeah,
Uh, I always say self-difference, but temperance, self-discipline rather, but
yeah,
temperance, um, and justice, right? If you have that down, you're going to make for a good citizen, and the citizens will make for a good society. But
yeah,
you're right. We also talk about physics, which to me is like a keen interest in the natural world. I'll put simply is that we're all amateur scientists, so to speak, pursuing wisdom.
yeah,
And the Stoics did talk about the metaphysical. That they did talk about at the beginning, at least,
yeah,
their view of God, which I've always found fascinating, and I would say is probably more of a modern way to view for those who you know believe in a God. I mean, the Stoics believed God was essentially everything, right? Or
yeah.
as
They
my
were
dad put it,
pantheists, I
yeah,
believe. Yeah,
yeah. So the way my dad put it is the Stoics believed that didn't believe that God was the watch maker. They believed he or she was the watch, right? So everything, like
yeah,
everything's composed, like your body, right? You don't know what's going on in your
yeah,
left pinky right now, but it's really important to your left pinky, right? So
yeah,
it's like if you get the example, right? So it's
yeah.
like
Absolutely.
everything is part of the whole, and the whole is what I think they referred to as the God, right?
Yeah,
Which became very different, later with the Judeo-Christian and other religions. But of
yeah.
course, you can be, and I know many, as you might guess, Catholics that are Stoics,
Yeah,
right? They've in Christianity, I think, incorporated a lot of the philosophy of Stoicism into, especially its early version of Christianity. It was actually people who posed as famous Stoics, like the false Zeno. If you've read about that,
yeah. I've only
that
barely heard about this. It's a very interesting topic, though.
we should probably do a whole episode on that. I have a friend
That'd be
who's
interesting.
has focused on that as a Christian and as someone I think he would call himself a Stoic, but he's actually spent some time on that. But um, so I'm not saying that it doesn't talk about the big lofty concepts of why are we here and
Right.
is there something after uh, life, uh, but it's most philosophies do talk about that, but most philosophies
Yeah.
don't talk about you need to journal every day so that you're keeping yourself honest, adhering to the principles you claim to,
Yeah.
you know, believe
Yeah.
in,
Push yourself on
right?
something hard every day, right?
Yeah. I mean, how many
Yeah.
other philosophies got directly incorporated into a psychotherapy system?
Yes.
If that's the correct term. Maybe
Yeah,
not.
yeah, for
Might be a
sure.
bad
Yeah, because Stoicism was used by the creator of REBT, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, and then that ended up
term.
becoming sort of streamlined into the CBT, the Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. And Donald Robertson has a great book about CBT and the
Yes, he
philosophy that
does.
it comes from, which
Right. That
which
shows how practical it is. Right.
exactly. And I think, you can take clear examples, right? Like, so we're talking about the pantheism of Stoics, you know, when you think about it as well, Hierocles and his circles of influence, right, his concentric circles, right, are intended to kind of give us the ability to understand where we fit in the great machinery of the universe, right? We're the innermost circle, and they go out and out and out. And to Stoics, God is kind of throughout all of it, right? And understand that if there is a God and it's working throughout everything, there's stuff we have control over and stuff we don't. And it's in many ways, I feel like that's one of the key things that makes it a philosophy, is it's giving us this perspective of finding out where we fit, which cog in the chain are we. And I think that you you don't see that through everything else so many philosophies, or philosophies that have now become religions in a way, right? They struggle with telling people how to try and use it, like right now, so or tomorrow, right? And I think humanity in general is looking for that in a way, right? We're always looking for that, Viktor Frankl, right? Man's Search for Meaning, right? I mean, that's a thing that we're trying to do every day. And I
Phenomenal
think
book. Everybody should read.
absolutely. Absolutely. So I wanted to talk quickly as well, because you mentioned the Cynics, and I thought there was an interesting story about this, right? So the Cynics, in some ways, I feel like the Cynics struggle at being a street philosophy, because they're like, we live in jars and
Yeah,
we go to the loo whatever we want, right? Which is not really, I don't buy that as a thing, that we should all be trying to do. But they do have one thing, for example, right, which is like, how do you teach yourself humility? And they're like, walk around with like stinky cheese and in a public place, and learn to be okay with the fact that people are going to judge you because of it, and just learn to be okay with that. And this, while the Cynics and Stoics, they're not rivals, but they're like parallel streams happening at the same time. Stoics actually did look at Diogenes the Cynic, for example, as a example of someone who they would like to be more like. Do they all want to live in jars? Probably not. But
right.
did they want to have the ability to be able to say, look, I can't control what other people think about me, so I'm going to focus on what I can control? Absolutely. And I think that's the kind of applied practice that we see, where not everybody gets that. Now, I'm not suggesting walking around with stinky cheese. I haven't tried it. I'm not sure I would. But I think it's one of those things of like, I think the Stoics in many ways look at some of these things like a muscle, where they're thinking about it like, you've got to practice it. You've got to do it. You've got to, like Marcus clearly says, like, stop reading and just do it. I'm paraphrasing that, but it gives you the ability to say,
good quote for what we're talking about.
Absolutely. Right. It's like, at some point you have to stop reading the book, right? You got to go out and do it. And I think, that's the application of it that many people struggle with. I will say one last thing, which is that I'm an atheist, right? And I would say people describe me as spiritual, and I would say that's probably true. But I find a home within Stoicism for myself, as much as for people who are Catholics, like you said, or Christians, or people from any of the Judeo-Christian religions and other religions as well, right? So,
sure, yes,
if it's a street philosophy, would say it again.
It's not exclusive, that's for sure.
No, exactly. It's far more inclusive than I think people realize. We've done the talk about misconceptions, but this is not a old white guy kind of tradition, I don't find.
Yeah. And to go back to, which I think is a really good point. I don't know for sure, but I always had the impression that Zeno, when he started as a cynic, and I think there's a lot of it's not anti-materialism in Stoicism, but certainly not emphasizing it as importance, that I think probably came from that, right?
Mm-hmm.
The people that used to live on the streets and on purpose, right? So not because they had to. I'm guessing, and maybe there's some evidence to this, but that he realized essentially the only way you could be a true cynic is if somebody else is willing to give you food and stuff, right? So
Yeah.
I'm guessing that's why he probably took some of the good parts of it and left the rest, because the only way that, at least my understanding of how the cynics lived back then, to be real, would be to mooch off of society.
Yeah.
To be frank, and that only works if somebody's willing to, basically take care of you.
Yeah.
Because you can't, if you're not willing to work, farm, or labor for somebody else to get money to buy food for your family and all that stuff. Talk about society not working, right? That would, if everybody was doing that, right, that ain't gonna work. So I think there is some parts of Stoicism that came from it. Again, the anti-material, well, not anti, but not de-emphasis on materialism. I think they were actually anti-materialism. But that's the practical application is, okay, but you still got to make your own way and take care of your own self and take care of your own family.
Yeah.
And that means you got to work. And if you're going to work, you're going to engage in society. So I do think, usually, unless you can figure out how to do that without engaging in society, but I do think that Stoicism ultimately is how to do that in a manner that's best for you and best for society. And that's why it talks a lot about anger, right? Managing anger, which is a problem for a lot of people. We all have, at our roots, the fight or flight response is probably never going to go away. Right? It's just evolutionarily embedded in us. That's not always a good thing in society, where you have to deal with somebody that you normally, in the old times, would want to punch, right? Can't do that. Can't do that. It's not good. Just like your mom said, especially when you become an adult. So it's a very practical way of dealing with your own ability to control anger. And that's why a lot of people get into Stoicism, I think. When I talk to people, and I've mentioned this, I do national security stuff, as you know, and any of our listeners probably know. So I go to all these conferences and summits, and it's almost every time every time since probably the last 2 years, somebody's come up to me where I think they're going to ask me about what's going to happen in the war of blah. And they go, "You're the Stoic guy." Right. So, and I just mentioned,
people always ask me about aliens. So
yeah, well, they know you're the space guy. But I'm expecting them to ask something that has to do with the agency or whatever.
Yeah. I get it.
National security. And it just happened last month. I told you we're training a bunch of SEALs. We do tactical training for all the special operations unit.
Yeah.
And when we had our barbecue at the end, had 5 different people come up to me and ask about our podcast, which I thought was really cool. But it shows me these are young, they're obviously warriors, but certainly from our perspective, young people, right? They're early 20s, right? Which the older you get, it's like, wow.
I remember that age.
But to be like, and think about all the stuff they have going on there.
Yeah.
Young special operators doing their part, and they still taking the time to listen to a podcast. It could be any podcast. And they all listen to Ryan's podcast, for example. I mean, he's leading the way. But my point of bringing it up is people want this philosophy for their own benefit. They must have value in it. And I think that is incredibly important for a philosophy to have, where people feel it has direct application to their daily life and not just some theoretical thing they're going to talk about in one of their, graduate level classes that they can talk about at a party one day that they took, they took this course in, advanced philosophy. This is something that everybody, whether you're a ditch digger or a general or a CEO or a space scientist, can take in their own life and say, this matters to me because it has a direct application for what I do and how I live.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, when you juxtapose Stoicism with something of its own time, like cynicism, right? I think cynicism has many aspects to it that I think are useful, but are also very antisocial, right? And Stoicism, I think in many ways was literally trying to flip that on its head. We Stoicism clearly says, and Ryan has talked about this in a couple of his podcasts recently, where it's like Stoicism is very clearly like you should be doing something. Like it is your duty to go out and vote. If we're talking about what can I do that's to better my society, go out and vote, be active in your community, right?
Yes.
What can I do to better, my interactions with others, right? It's like, show justice and benevolence towards them, work on your anger, things like that, right? So, there's that sometimes like, I do have a Zen part of practice to my practice personally. And that's because I, in some ways, I was looking for something that could let me think about bigger issues, right? But at the same time, sometimes you struggle because you can't really like some of these questions are very open ended and they're meant to open your mind, right? But then it's like, well, how do I apply that day to day? And I'm not faulting Zen. I'm just saying it's a different approach to life, right? And Zen does have practical stuff to it, which is why I think it actually runs very parallel to Stoicism. But there are times where it's definitely pushing your brain into a very high space. But Stoicism has always felt to me to be the one where it's like, well, how do I do this now or tomorrow or later today? And I think, that
Yes.
comes up. I think in the world that it was developing in as well, right? Not to go too much in history, right? It's, you've got Stoics, you've got Cynics. There's something in the middle, which is like a peripatetic, I think is one of the other ones. And then you've also got just straight up sophists who
That's
basically
a good one.
believe in the spoken word, right? And,
And how
I
to
think,
manipulate people with it.
yeah, how to manipulate people with it, right? And Stoics are sitting there being like, if it's not true, don't say it. Like
Yeah.
that's in Meditations, right? And so the practical application of it is key. I mean, it's kind of for someone who works in the applied sciences, right, engineering, and someone who has lived in many ways a very applied lifestyle, work in the stuff that you've done in your own life, Mick. It's in many ways, I think it's like it's very common sense that we would have come to this, right, because it makes sense to us. But you know, but I guess a question I'd love to ask you is like, what sort of practical things do you think that someone from the outside of Stoicism world would see first for it? Do you think, or value they might find from it? Because I'd love to do an episode where we get a couple of newbies in. Because I have some friends who started listening to the podcast because of me,
Mhm.
and then they're like, "Wow, I didn't know this was what it was about." And I keep holding back this question, which is like, "What did you find out first?" Right? What do you think?
Yeah.
Like, what do you think someone from the outside would see first from a
That's a good
practical side?
question because I've always been, and
You've always been in it.
I've always been in it. So I know that most people I talk to are coming to it. They have some familiarity, potentially in school or just some reference. I mean, everybody's watched Gladiator, right? So,
Sure.
um,
Yeah.
I mean, it's true, right? It's because
Yeah.
they go, "Who is this kid guy?" And then they Google Aurelius, and then that's
They
a
get
lot of
Richard Harris.
people's. Well, obviously, but a lot of people that's their first.
Yeah.
Oh, Stoicism. That guy was a
Yeah. Yeah.
Stoic. Um, so I would like to know more. I do hear they usually bring up when people that come up to me are a certain type usually, and it's usually military people. So they've always been familiar with it. It's the day they join the military because it is part of the resilience of every branch of the service in the United States, like
Yeah.
officially. Stoicism. One, because I guess you can make everything controversial, but Stoicism generally isn't controversial. Like, what's to be controversial about it, right? I mean, you have to really dig deep. You're like, oh, you don't like wisdom, you don't like, I mean, what is it that you don't like about it? So, and it's not a religion, right? So it's not like you're trying to
Right.
hoist a belief system on somebody. Um, Not that there's anything wrong with religion,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that
It's just a
obviously in
different
a
approach. Yeah.
secular society, they can't promote, they're not supposed to. I mean, current,
Yeah.
you know, uh,
Not supposed to push
defense
one.
secretary excluded from that. But people generally don't have an issue whether you're religious or non-religious learning about Stoicism because it's a philosophy. It's a practical philosophy. I'd like to hear. I think people usually start, and I don't mean this in a conceited way, but themselves. The aspect of Stoicism that's about fixing your stuff. And
Yeah.
that's kind of the way it should start because if you can't get your own stuff in order, um, then how much are you going to really contribute to society in a way that's positive,
Yeah.
right? So, and mea culpa. I'm a Stoic that benefits from Stoicism, but I don't know that I exemplify every aspect. So,
Right.
I do a lot of TV appearances on national security, right?
Right.
Generally speaking, and I've been doing it for 8 years. And I obviously belong to a network, a U.S. network, but I do a lot of foreign. This is going somewhere. Just give me a second. Do a lot of foreign ones.
Yeah. Yeah.
The foreign ones are more challenging, right? Because I am on with Russians, with Iranians, with Chinese as the counter. And I've
Right.
been doing it for many years. And I
Right.
can disagree with people, generally speaking, without making it personal or getting angry.
Right.
But recently, I was on with, and we're at war with them, but I was on with an Iranian uh, who, right in the middle of me answering the 15th question about something that the president of my country tweeted, which obviously I was opposed to talking about destroying civilizations. The person interrupted me and then started going after the U.S. military as a bunch of coward warmongers, blah, blah, blah. This is a country that just approved 12-year-olds fighting for them, by the way.
Right.
I saw red. I turned back into the Irish American Marine and I got pissed. And I think if you'd ever see the video, you'd go, whoa. And I say that
I will not be sharing that link.
The opposite of bragging. It was, I got off the thing. I was like, God dang it. Here I am.
Yeah.
I am a Stoic, not a perfect one.
Right.
But that's a terrible example. And yeah, I was telling him that I went back at him, put it that way. This is a guy who, he could have been in a uniform fighting back, but he was, sending 12-year-olds out to fight for him and talking about how the U.S. military is cowards. So not to get into the substance of the disagreement, but the point of me bringing it up was I lost my temper.
Yeah.
And so it's a forever philosophy is my point. The point isn't to say, I lost my temper. I guess I'm not really a Stoic, so I'm just moving on. The point is, I lost my temper. That's not what I say I'm about. I can't actually, be successful in a debate if I'm,
right.
Running around like a silverback gorilla. I need to take what I did, adjust it, not do it again.
Yeah.
That's my point of bringing up that.
Yeah, for sure. And you and I have had this discussion a little bit before, and we have an episode called Struggling to be a Stoic. It was one of our first ones because actually at the time, I think I was struggling with something at that time.
Did have that, yeah.
Yeah, I think, I was one of those as well that came to it. I was like you in a weird way. You and I have a funny parallel here because my mother was an academic in like anthropology and whatnot, and the classics were always in my house. I just never picked one to kind of follow, And then, the simple story for me was 10 years ago, I got divorced and I was in a very dark place and I was trying to figure out how to get out of that hole. Right. And I knew of some of these things and I was like, well, wait a second, this is how I want to be. That's what I want to be like. And then I was like, oh, well, this is my thing. So I agree with you. I think a lot of people get it started from the personal side where they go, oh, well, this is kind of telling me something that I want to be like. So maybe it'll help me be more like that. Right. And I think that's where it really is a street thing, right? Because it's like classic example. We've talked about this before, but Marcus starts his day writing in his journal saying, today you will meet sycophants, narcissists, sociopaths, psychopaths, right? Like, this long list. I'm being very extreme in that, but he's listing off all these people, right? Busybodies, backtalkers, whatever. You just kind of have to be ready that that's going to happen, right? I think the one thing about Stoicism that I enjoy, which sounds weird, but I'll explain it. I think one thing about Stoicism that I enjoy is that it's not a glossed over thing. We don't talk about the hopeful. We don't Marcus clearly says no, we're not. Don't expect Plato's Republic, right? We're not living, and actually they all say it in some form. We're not living in a perfect society. It would be weird to expect that it would be like that. We are striving to be better. We'd love to be in a perfect society one day, but ultimately we're human beings, and this is what happens. And so that's why when you or I have faltered, I faltered in a couple of weeks ago where I lost it on somebody and I shouldn't have. we can also take from the philosophy that like we are human, emotions are normal, something that happens. You can't change the past, but you can be better for the future from it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Totally.
I think that just resonates with so many people. Again, I don't think you and I are elevating Stoicism as being above others. I think it's just pointing out that it's an aspect of the philosophy that I think resonates with us and with others, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think there's any benefit to trying to like make it a competition, right?
No.
If another philosophy helps you, good on you. That's great. But if this philosophy, I think, helps a lot of people, and I think it's going to
Yeah.
help a lot more. So part of it is expanding it. And
Yeah.
although we're never going to live in an ideal society, the founder of Stoicism laid out what he thought was an ideal society, which even today would be pretty ambitious.
Yes.
All right. So, uh, and if we're all wanting to be part of something like that, I think that would be better for everybody. Um, so I find it to be something that keeps me honest too. There's another, another thing, aspect about Stoicism. Yeah, and people bring it up a lot. You could be the CEO of a Fortune 100 company and be a
Yeah.
Stoic, and there's a lot of them actually. So when you go to these conferences, there's a lot of really successful business persons. Why? I think, and I've asked them, is they've done really well at that, but they want more, and they want more. It doesn't mean material stuff; it means more out of life. That's like the
Right.
universal response. Not that I am one of them or can speak for them,
Oh,
but
I
that's
am
what.
not.
Well, right, but I mean that's what they tell me, and I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, okay. So and they often bring in Stoics, or
Yeah.
people call themselves Stoics, uh, to talk. So that's how I met them. And then obviously we already talked about the military, but there's another guy named Andy Smalls who spoke at a uh, conference that I was at. He
Yeah.
is one of the head, I don't know what their title is, but like administrators of the UK prison system. And he has
Yes.
brought Stoicism into prison and used it as one of the means to stop the recurrence of criminals, right? So that they don't just get out and end up right back where they were. It's been
Yeah.
very successful. They've expanded it, and actually, if you go through the course now, I'm
Yeah.
told that you get essentially credit,
Yeah.
when it comes to time served, and it has a very low recidivism rate for
Yes.
people who went through the course. And now and I apologize for not remembering the other. Haven't met him, but he was a student of Andy's, who's now the biggest proponent of it. So he was in prison,
Yeah.
and now,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's not just for the CEOs and generals. It's for the privates. It's for the laborers. It's for
Right.
even folks. It's for the alcoholics. I mean, read
Yes.
the prayer for the alcoholics. You can't get much more stoic than that. I think
No.
it's a stoic poem.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, the guy who
right,
wrote it had been the guy who wrote it. I think is connected to REBT and is also connected
right,
to the philosophy as well. Yeah.
100%. So
Yeah.
it is a philosophy also for everyone. You're not going to
Yeah.
see, a criminal struggling with substance abuse necessarily um, finding another philosophy. They might find a
Right.
religion. That happens a lot. But another
Sure.
philosophy? Really? I
Yeah.
haven't heard it. But they do find Stoicism, and Stoicism has a direct application. I think that's probably the best example that I would use. That
Yeah.
Andy
Yeah.
Smalls.
I've actually met Andy. I was thinking about this as you were describing him. I met him doing the old podcast for Modern Stoicism. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
good
great
guy.
guy.
Yeah,
Maybe that episode can come back, but yeah, it's a really good point. But that's the thing, right? Like the fact that all levels of society can use something, I think, makes it a street philosophy where it can literally be anything, anybody,
totally.
anywhere. And I think that's kind of what, well, for me, that's kind of the big thing that resonated for me was like, well, if this works for anybody, it can work for me. And I don't know, that was what happened.
And it
Am
can
I?
work for those that are listening. It can work for you. It will work for you. I
Yeah,
believe.
I believe that as well. So, well, we should wrap up for today because it's a busy weekend, I think, for both of us on some stuff. But I do want to make one quick thing. Today is International Day for Human Spaceflight. I'm going to be a nerd and throw that out there. So, happy International Human Spaceflight Day, Mick. And also, we're coming up on springtime. So, I'd love for everybody out there listening to this and listening to our Street Philosophy podcast that. Rebirth is coming where things are growing again. It's starting to get green, even up here in Canada. So,
Amen.
Mick, do you have any closing thoughts for us today?
Well, on your spaceflight day, in honor of Artemis II, me and my business partner were on the road and we watched, shows you we're old guys now, right? So at night we watched Apollo 13 and then Martian. And Martian I hadn't watched since it came out. Yeah. That is an excellent movie. I don't know. You're the expert, but for me, I just thought it was phenomenal.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. I mean, I also recommend Project Hail Mary. It's more sci-fi. Totally. It has more sci-fi to it, but Andy Weir, excellent. But he was an astrophysicist. That's what he did. He worked in orbital mechanics. So that was his thing. But The Martian is a great book for Stoics, actually, I will say, where it's like, well, I'm out of luck on a planet by myself. So
right.
Yeah.
Good point. I need to get the book.
It's okay.
I read Project Hail Mary, so I'm really excited about the movie.
Yeah,
we should also do some
all good
movie discussion.
Well, thank you, Mick, for today. Movies. Oh, sorry. Say again.
We should do some Stoic movies.
Yeah, Stoic movie podcast. That sounds like fun. We should totally look at that.
Yeah,
Gladiator number 1.
Of course.
All right, mate. Well, listen, we should wrap up for today. But for everybody out there, would love to hear your thoughts on this being a street philosophy. How did it affect your life? How did you come into it? Love to hear from you. Write in the comments. info@pubandporch.com. Would love to hear from you all. So until next time, cheers, Mick.
Sláinte. Thank you for listening to the Pub and Porch podcast. If you'd like to find out more about the podcast or its host, head over to pubandporch.com, and you can listen to all our episodes on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you prefer. And if you'd like to help out with the podcast, you can find us on Patreon. Drop us an email if you have a comment on any past episode, you have a suggestion for future episodes, or you have an essay on an important topic for Stoicism. Send it to us, and then we can be reached at info@pubandporch.com. Today's music was provided by bensound.com. Until next time, Pub and Porch out.